Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, this is going to be the Zero to Hero episode on Bleed Net Puncture Rogue. So the idea is we utilize shadows to create a very large amount of net traps and combine all of that into a bleed setup, because I thought that bleed would be the cheapest way of going about this and making it very easy to play solo character found, which we are playing today. Now, I was unsure about this build overall, mainly because I did not know if nets using traps was a bug or not, but I've had a few conversations with the devs already about this, and yes, it is actually, intended that nets work with shadows. I did not know that at all, to be honest, up until recently, which is cool, but there's like no tool tips about it. There's no in-game mechanics explaining it or anything like that. They were just added and they just worked. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, I don't mind at all. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, this is cool as fuck. But, just not knowing in the first place was kind of annoying. But yeah, let's talk about this build, shall we? Now, this one's going to be a little bit of the longer variety again, as we're doing the full entire series of getting from level 1 all the way to 10 out of 10 Harbingers. So if you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that's the best way of showing me that you want to see more content like this. And of course, this content takes a decent amount of time to create, unlike my normal content. So here we are in character selection screen. We're going to be going with totally fair and balanced, as I could not believe my eyes when I heard that you can use nets with shadows, as there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with that. One thing I want to mention quick is we're going to be leveling with Flurry, and so there is a enemy later that we actually kill in this first little zone that actually guarantees drops a bow. And I never knew this, to be honest with you. I thought that you just kind of screwed around until you dropped a bow. I didn't think that you would actually drop a bow in the first enemy killed. Like, that's crazy to me. It doesn't tell you anywhere or anything like that. Just a neat little thing, So that's nice. It's always guaranteed to drop you a bow. And that makes the start for Rogue a lot easier than I thought it'd be, considering, you get Puncture eventually, and range Puncture is 20 billion times better than normal melee Puncture early on. So you definitely want to be picking up that bow, as you'll see later. So yeah, first enemy drops a bow, like that first little Phoenix guy. Now, a little tip in the early game is Rogue. Acid Flask is actually better than Flurry for pack clear. That's because Acid Flask has an AoE, and ailments early on, especially guaranteed ailments like this, are very strong. Even Poison is very strong early on in the campaign. As you can see, it only takes like a hit or two to kill enemies with Acid Flask, so you can just use that on your bar until you get to level 5. I usually grind out to level 5 in this zone because the monsters are easier than the monsters later on, and it allows you to swap to Puncture, which helps immensely. So here's our first little boss. You can see just how good range Puncture is, just allowing you to stack a very large amount of bleeds very quickly on targets, and it pierces through all enemies. It does have less hit damage per pierce, but you really don't care about that because we're going to be scaling ailments. I don't know why it just doesn't say less damage. I don't know why it specifically makes like less hit damage. It's such a weird reason. I don't know why. Just don't ask me. But pretty much we're going to be using range Puncture because it's superior to almost every other skill early on. And that's because, like I said, it auto pierces. That's very good early on because there's not that many skills that clear really well early on for Rogue, all the way up until you get to like access to Shadow Cascade and stuff like that. Like Flurry doesn't pierce through enemies, so you're only hitting one enemy at a time. Shurikens is kind of mediocre for damage, and Acid Flask, is pretty bad itself later after level 3. Another little tip I have for you is there's actually a node inside Puncture that gives you access to Frenzy on hit. I would heavily suggest grabbing that first out of all the other nodes, as, Getting 20% attack speed early on, this early on, is just a lifesaver. As you can see, when I'm actually going to attack things and stuff like that, I don't spend 5 years in an animation, which helps a lot when you're trying to like kite these mobs and not die and stuff like that. And it also helps on bosses because it's just effectively 20% more damage at this point because you don't have any other damage modifiers currently. Now we're going to kill the last boss of Act 1 pretty easily because bleed and other ailments right now early on are very strong, and any source that guarantees it like Puncture or Acid Flask are very good early on. Just being able to just simply pump and dump all of that extra ailment chance. Ailments, like I said in the last video, are very strong and probably will get nerfed eventually for the early game, and they'll probably make some way of like making them scale through levels or something like that. They definitely don't want to give them base damage as they've stated before, but they definitely could mess around with it more. Here we are in Act 2. Mainly you want to focus on items that give you more ailment chance, generic damage over time, phys damage, movement speed, physical resistance. Those are your main stats that you're looking for. Other stats you eventually want to look out for is like elemental res as well, as that helps you out in Act 4 and, you know, of course in the later monoliths. But mainly just getting some physical res is good to go early on here. These bosses are actually way easier to kill on Puncture than on a lot of other builds, mainly because if you line them up right, you can hit them all at once with Puncture, which leads to some satisfying visuals, just shish kebabbing them all at once, and leads to the boss fight not taking as long. You know, right after playing the other character, it just makes me kind of cringe at how bad of a time Melee really does have in last Epoch. Just comparing my playthrough of this build versus like the last build, which was the Gathering Storm Shaman, it's just crazy to me, and I'll probably end up comparing it multiple times throughout this playthrough. This boss goes down pretty quickly, as, you know, he's just a bullet sponge pretty much. Nothing too crazy about this boss at all. Being able to hit him from range with Puncture is pretty nice, but like it's not mandatory. He's pretty easy, all things considered. All right, so we are going to be choosing a Blade Dancer for this setup. The main reason why we're going Blade Dancer is early on, it gives us a very large amount of bleed chance by just spamming dual swords and stuff like that, also glancing blow at the same time. And generally, that works very well with the setup that we're going to be playing later, which involves dual katanas and Salt the Wound. Now, if you want to be a lot more defensive, I would suggest going with a Falconer setup, where you run a shield, like the Bleed Shield from the Abomination boss, Player's Pride, and also going with like a Dragon Bone Axe. That would be the way I would go if you wanted a more defensive setup of this build. But I have kind of just said it to myself that Falconer really is still in alpha testing, and I really don't feel like alpha testing for other people. I'd rather wait till the game actually catches up with Falconer, that's all. As you can see here with our setup with our Puncture, we can just kind of like line up enemies. It's very nice being able to do this. So what you do is you just simply run away from the enemies, kind of like do the stutter step, and you can kind of line them up and allow Puncture to hit them all at once. You want to be looking up for enemies that are lined up and hitting multiple at once. It makes Puncture feel so much more better when you're hitting multiple enemies at the same time. And walking away from them and having them follow you is the best way of making them line up. And it just feels great overall. Like, I would rate like Puncture leveling at like the second out of the classes and stuff like that. The only one I would say that is better this early on is of course Glacier, and that's just because mages get Glacier, like access to Glacier very early on, versus all the other classes where they don't get access to their quote-unquote power skills till later on. This is where we get access to Spinny Umbra Blades around like level 4 or 5, and Umbra Blades allows us to do a very large amount of damage, even with the added 40% less chance to apply ailments on it, and all of the Shadow Dagger nerfs on it, all of that combined. It is still not enough to keep Shadow Daggers or Umbra Blades down, and as you can see, one of the like best ways of leveling right now for Rogue is to just simply run Puncture, Bow, and Umbral Blades, because you just leave the Umbral Blades under enemies, you get some generic bleed chance, and you just run, and that's it. Obviously here I have a shrine, but still, like, it's just really nice being able to just put Umbral Blades under things and watch them die as you walk away. And the amount of single target is absurd, because since they limited it so that you can only use one spinny Umbral Blade under bosses, you just put one Umbral Blade under the boss and then you use Puncture, because Puncture's global bleed stacks that it provides are global. So you can actually do damage with the Puncture and the Umbral Blades at the same time, which leads to absurd amounts of DPS early on. Yeah, as you'll see on this boss, the combo of utilizing Umbral Blades and Puncture is just so freaking strong right now. Already like 20 plus stacks of bleed on the target. Like, it's really hard to go wrong with this setup currently. Like, I hope they keep it in the game, because it's definitely like one of the more satisfying ways of leveling Rogue per se. I really couldn't see myself leveling different ways, maybe Shadow Dagger related things, but like right now, leveling Rogue is kind of meh, so hopefully, they keep this specific way of doing it. So the leveling on this build is really simple, so I'm not going to go into it as much of detail as I normally would, because it's like, you literally Puncture, you Umbral Blades, you shift. It's really hard to mess all that up. So the idea, like I said, is you Puncture things, then you shift to give the massive bonuses to Umbral Blades, and bing bada boom, you got a leveled Rogue. Like, it's really hard to mess it up. And then once you get to level 35, you can equip Net and start leveling that up. And all the planners for this will be down in the description, but it's really hard for me to explain more in detail, because this is just the most simplistic leveling you possibly could have. Just to give you a quick idea of how much damage this all does, here's the last two bosses of Act 4. As you can see, just blasting through HP like it's nothing, while also being underleveled, because, we're playing a Rogue, and Rogues are completely fine and balanced. They're completely fine. What's like, no problems whatsoever, nothing here. Not ridiculous amounts of damage being done. Who cares? Ignore it. Pretend it doesn't exist. Now here we have some spice. We finally re-specialized into Net Puncture. So the idea here is we utilize Synchronized Strike, which then creates a few shadows. Later on, we'll be creating 4 shadows. Then with those 4 shadows, we throw out more nets. Now normally nets, when you throw one, you throw 3 of them with the net trap node, and those 3 net traps can then cast Puncture. Now, because we're having shadows throw them, we're actually getting 3 nets per shadow, if I'm not mistaken. I've done a bunch of testing on this, and it seems like as though we are getting 3 net casts per shadow. And then those 3 net casts can then, of course, apply Puncture, stuff like that, and then they override each other because you can only have 6 total, and then they auto trigger, which causes even more punctures. I'm not entirely sure if the forced activation of the traps, if you go over 6, function correctly in that way. I believe they do, otherwise the damage wouldn't be so high, but if they don't, then I am mistaken, because like, you really can't tell, sadly, because there's just so many animations going on, and they kind of like act the same way, and they kind of overlap on each other. So I can't tell if we're getting 3 punctures per, per shadow. But definitely seems like it for the most part. And that early on just feels really great. And then, of course, we grab the Caltrops node, which throws down Caltrops, which, apply bleeds as things walk over them. And it actually leads to a decent amount of clear, as when things walk over them, they actually do a lot of damage. Now, the only problem with this setup that I found is you do have to aim it at your feet. If you try to aim it anywhere other than your feet, like if you aim it like far away from you, the spread of the net traps get very wide, as you can see in some of the footage here. They just don't group together well if you're trying to shoot a farther target. But if you're throwing it at your feet and you make the shadows shoot towards you, they overlap perfectly. You get all the punctures. It feels really good. And even right now with this scuff setup that I have, like, it feels great. Now, because of this, the way that Puncture works is to get the bleed stacks that you want, you have to actually manually hit with Puncture, which means, of course, during bosses, you will have to manually hit with Puncture. So you can see here, I'm actually testing around with a bunch of skills, mainly because I'm trying to figure out what I want to play with in the end game, because no one has played this build, so I've been just experimenting, and so far I've liked utilizing Smoke Bomb Traversal, as I'll explain later why it feels so good. So this boss is a little bit more annoying than I'm usually used to on a rogue, and that is because normally I'd be playing net puncture, but as you can see, I do like 140 plus bleed stacks with one attack. I am pretty sure the punctures are all hitting. That's on top of the caltrops, the nets, just so many hits, as you can tell. Just an absolutely insane amount of hits coming out of her build, and just absolutely melts them. And that's all thanks to just the interactions that we have currently. Now we finally get our last skill specialization at level 50, and I gave in. I said, screw it, let's try Umbral Blades. And I tried Umbral Blades, and Umbral Blades are really good. Now, ironically though, it's not all of our damage this time around. Normally when you swap to Umbral Blades, it ends up, being parasitic to your build, and, Umbral Blades is really strong, don't get me wrong. But I've tried just clearing with Umbral Blades versus clearing with net versus clearing with that. Right now, the reason why I have really good clear is in combination of both. So the nets just apply good coverage, the punctures apply good damage, and the caltrops, of course, do both. And then the Umbral Blades do all that as well. And I think it's the combination of everything happening at once. As you can see, just absolute chaos every single time I just throw my nets out. Because remember, when I throw my nets, if I'm not mistaken, I get more caltrops. I'm pretty sure I do. I've tested with and without the shadows, and it seems like as though there are more throws of caltrops every single time I throw. And so we'll get up to 5 throws of caltrops technically, I believe anyways. It's hard to tell because, you can't really tell. Like, I think I can tell because, like, I'll see it and I'll see extra caltrops if I throw one thing instead of like 3 or 4 or 5 later on. So I'm pretty sure we're getting extra caltrops as well. But all of these hits combined leads to just really good clear, all things considered. Like, the moment I got this entire build set up, like, I was zooming, dude. Like, I was like, holy crap, this feels amazing. And we're not even playing a falconer, dude. We're playing a blade dancer. Like, it's not like as if we're playing with the razorfall boots or anything like that, but like, it just feels great. Now, of course, as you can see, the mana cost is a little annoying, but thankfully Puncture, with the increased attack speed it has, helps us out with mana. And this build overall just feels good enough. It pumps enough damage on enemies. As you can see, literally like 300 bleed stacks already. It's crazy. So here's the A-bomb fight. Like I was saying before, I don't think mana is that big of an issue on this build because we just do so much upfront damage, it doesn't matter. So as you can see here, I got the combo going. I puncture every so often. We're already at like 500, 600 stacks of bleed. And remember, this is a fresh character, level 40. That's crazy. Now, to give you an idea of how good the clear feels with all of this random garbage on my screen, so here's just one of the missions up to Rye. Like, remember, I'm just like level like 40 or whatever at this point, right? I am just absolutely zooming at this point. Every so often I will need to fill up my mana bar, but like, I'm just absolutely zooming and I just love it. I love this setup. Like, the moment that I put net on my bar, like, I fell in love with it. Like, I love net so far. I love just the amount of chaos you can throw down, like, on a casual basis. Just being able to just like, oh yeah, here you go. Here's like 5 casts of net, which also casts 2 extra casts of net per shadow, which is then 3 punctures per net, 1 caltrop cast per net, and then of course 3 Umbral Blades in total. We get plenty of Umbral Blades cast from this as well. Just all of that combined just leads to so much damage so quickly. As you can see, like, I'm just sneezing on these bosses and I'm immediately killing them. Like, overall, just very entertaining build so far. Now, I will say the rotation on bosses is kind of annoying. That's mainly because of the fact that we need to spam two skills that move us, i.e. Sync Strike and Smoke Bomb. Now, if you pay more attention to how you're playing, you can actually utilize these to, use Sync Strike to get out of danger. Same thing with Smoke Bomb for the most part. But generally, you kind of just want to be spamming your skills. So the way my rotation works is I Sync Strike, I net, I Puncture, then I use my Smoke Bomb whenever I can, and then that usually keeps me up on stacks and mana as well. Specifically, the mana part is very important because, having mana for this feels great. Now, to give you an idea of what I was talking about mana-wise, my mana was so good with the normal setup of Sync Strike that I was able to swap over to 4 Shadow Sync Strike very quickly. Normally, you would not do this in like 100 years with most other builds because it takes forever to get to this point. But our damage ramp was so high that I can just pretty much overkill everything with 5 or 4 shadows-ish plus Smoke Bomb. Like, you saw me just delete both of those freaking rares there. Like, it's disgusting, and I just have rare weapons and like shitty gear. Overall, just like, God, I'm just so in love with the amount of hits that this causes right now. So here's the last phase of Lagan. I just wanted to save you guys a little bit of time because, we're all busy individuals. As you can see, we're doing plenty of damage to Lagan. Not even a problem. I will say running around in his arena while also not having good physical res is kind of annoying because I have to dodge pretty much all of the slams and stuff like that. But overall, it was a fine experience. Lagan's always just really annoying with his fists because I usually like to play characters that are way lower level than the content, which causes me to die to his fists a lot more often than normal. Now here's the dragon fight. This is pretty easy because it's really hard for all of your stuff to miss because he's got such a fat ass. We also made it so Puncture starts applying Fizz Shred stacks as well, which is an extra free pen early on. I was actually streaming this little portion, by the way, so if you want to watch me live working on this stuff, I heavily suggest going in the description and going to the link down below for my Twitch. But I'm really enjoying like this so far. Like, I was talking about it on stream, like, dude, like, I'm just blasting. Like, we got all this done. We got to empowered monos so quickly. It's great. And there you go. Easy. Now we're rushing through monos. Here we got the little tech here where we aggro the shamans and then walk back through this little passage. This will group up the shamans and allow us to shotgun them way easier. As you can see, all grouped up, ready to go. Get it all ready, start spamming my buttons. As you can see, just absolute chaos. As you can see, just fucking 700 stacks of bleeds already, like this early on in the character. Just, oh, there's 2 shamans dead. Oh, there's 3 shamans dead. So I was feeling a little cocky this time around because of how well the build is performing. So I thought I'd knock out one of the more harder harbingers first. So we're actually doing a Reign of Winter first, and then we're going to go and kill the Gaspar Harbinger instead as the first Harbinger we kill, because that one's really annoying in empowered monos because he just does a decent amount of damage and there's a lot of chaos going around. So normally for characters, if they're a little underpowered per se, let's say, right, I go and do Age of Winter instead. But, this time around, we're going to do Gaspar. So that means we have to kill Mr. Horseman over here. As you can see, just absolute absurd amount of bleeds. The mana is not even a problem. As you can see with our ward, we're actually generating a decent amount of ward, which I'll explain in a moment what's going on with that. But pretty much just absolutely shredding through endgame. So real quick before we go to the boss, I want to explain why we have so much ward. The reason why I went with Smoke Bomb instead of Shift, and I went with Sync Strike and all this and all that, was I wanted to test the affixes that were added a while back, ward when you create a shadow. Right now, I think I have around 200 to 300, like about 100 ward when you create a shadow. And that doesn't sound like much, but thanks to the new ward calculations that they've done, where they've made it so that ward does not decay as quickly when it's in its lower amounts, this is highly beneficial to builds that just generate a decent amount of ward very quickly. Like for instance this, like sure, every single time I sync strike, I get an extra 500 HP on top. And that can be integral to Rogue because Rogue doesn't have that much HP scaling early on. So right now, as you can see, I'm sitting around at like 600 ward for a few seconds there, and that's on top of my 1400 HP. That's almost half my HP in ward extra, just by kind of casually, fucking around and using Sync Strike. And it just gives you a nice barrier between dying and not dying, and that on top of all of the leech that you have just feels great, right? And the reason why we're running Smoke Bomb, if you didn't know, when you create that shadow, you'll gain the ward per second. So essentially what you're doing is you're turning your ward when you create a shadow into ward per second. So if you have 100 ward, when you create a shadow, you're creating 100 ward per second on top of Sync Strike, which makes it feel much better. So we're going to skip the normal boss because let's be real, the real boss is the Harbinger. I'm very scared of the red beams here because they could spell out my death very quickly. And even with the Harbinger moving around a bunch, my AoE coverage is so large that even with all of that extra movement he's doing, I can still hit him with a fair amount of my attacks. Especially with, all the, the nets going around and stuff like that. As you can see, we still put on a large amount of bleeds, even though I'm trying my darndest to, actually dodge his attacks and not just face tank them. But I'll be honest, I think I could face tank him pretty easily, all things considered, because I'm gaining so much ward per second. Like, there you go, deleted that quickly. Now, of course, that means that we need to go unlock COF. So you can use the little waypoint here, skip through Jurla, and go unlock COF. Now, we're going to do a little bit of a DPS check. I usually do this just to give you an idea how much damage you should be doing around this time. And we're blasting it out already at 200k ticks already on the dummy into empowered monos. Just absolutely wonderful. Way more than what you need, like double what you need in my opinion, and halfway to endgame capable DPS. So here we have our first empowered mono. We are a little squishy for empowered monos. You should have around like 2k HP right now, but this is where the ward really starts kicking in. For the most time of this character, I actually spend at this HP number. And the main reason why is on top of Valadyr's Chalice, which is a lot of health gained on kill, that combined with the ward created on Shadow with our setup, both of those combined means that we have a lot more sustain than you normally would have as a rogue at this point. All of that combined just leads to the build feeling so much better than it would, in my opinion, because just so much extra ward. I think from now on, when I play shadow-based rogues, or just rogues in general, I might even adopt the idea of running ward when you create a shadow with, of course, smoke bomb. And that combined is just, it kind of turns that ward, like I said, into ward per second. So I'm thinking about that more in detail because you can run it on the prefixes of your chest, your helmet, and your idols. And all that combined means that you can get a decent amount of ward per second. And you don't even need to be scaling intelligence, dude. It just feels great having that extra buffer and that extra sustain. Hybrid's great right now. Now, of course, as we all know, the noob filter of last Epoch, the second Harbinger. This usually throws me for a loop whenever I'm playing a less than ideal build. But of course, as you can see with the amount of bleeds that we're applying to him, it's not that big of a deal, especially with the massive amount of ward that we're gaining just by existing as a rogue. And of course, as you can see, we actually got some upgrades in our HP, so we're at 1700, and this is where our HP actually stands all the way until we hit 300 corruption, and that's just because the ward's just too good, bro. It's good enough. All we really need now is some damage. Now, I haven't been talking too much about my upgrades, but mainly we're just running a bunch of bleed generic stuff. On top of this, we're running a Valdir's Chalice. If you don't know, Valdir's Chalice is just a lot of life gain on kill, a lot of bleed duration, bleed chance, stuff like that. But most of the power that we're seeing here comes from the ward from when we created Shadow and from just the Blade Dancer tree itself. It just has a lot of damage early on. As you can see, we do plenty of damage, especially when we actually get to do our damage to him when we're not dancing with him. It's great. Not a bad fight at all. Now, this is the belt that I actually end with for the rest of the run. We're actually running some mana regen. That's because, you know, we really need a very large amount of mana regen to make this build work, as it kind of smooths it out, especially with those synchronized strike mana efficiency idols as well. All of that on top of each other allows us to actually spam our sync strike way easier, and it's definitely the idols you want to be going for with this kind of build, and eventually the kind of affixes you want to be going for on your chest plate, specifically like T7 synchronized strike mana. I never got one in this run, but it's definitely something you should be going for. Another thing I'd like to point out while we're gearing here is the Blood Visage base gives you just a massive 100% increased damage on top of 20% duration. Really good, all things considered. It's crazy. Now, as you can see here, we're making a decent belt. Now, of course, here is our first Oribus. With how fast you saw the Harbingers go down, I'm pretty sure you know exactly how this is going to go. Although, he gets a little bit less bleed on him, and I think that's because he's smaller. I know Oribus is pretty small, all things considered, but I did have to dodge the meteor, to be fair. I couldn't just face tank that. I'm pretty sure that hits multiple times. So now here's where the fun ends, and this is where Dread starts complaining a little bit. So we're doing this, we're doing the Idol of Ruin, we're killing him before we kill, you know, the Harbinger, right? And it goes way smoother than when I was going with the Gathering Storm build or the Tempest Strike build or whatever you want to call it, the Shaman, right? It's so much easier that I was just so disappointed when I was doing this. You just compare this to the Tempest Strike footage that I provided, it's just night and day, dude. It's night and day, and like, I really hope EHG does something. Even if, like, let's say it wasn't bugged out, it would still be so painful for the Tempest Strike build. It's just crazy to me that Net in its current state can exist, and Umbral Blaze as well, of course, obviously, but we've, like, you know, beat that in like a dead horse. You know, it's like, it's enough of time about Umbral Blaze, right? But Net, I can't believe Net exists while we have something like Gathering Storm. The reason why I bring up Net is because Net came in the same patch as Gathering Storm did. That means that they were designed around the same time. So I don't know how that, and Tempest Strike was also reworked at the same time. I don't know how Tempest Strike can be how it is while this is how it is. It's just, it's mind-boggling. Like, to give you an idea, like, my fight with Tempest Strike was like 7 minutes, I think, or 9 minutes long, or 10. No, actually, I think it was 11 minutes. Oh, this is just 3 minutes. It's crazy to me just how much effort was put into Net, while, you know, Tempest Strike was like meh. So now we're just kind of spamming through these bosses, trying to get through it as fast as possible, because, like, I'll be honest, I might need a little bit of HP upgrades here and maybe like a damage upgrade or two. But overall, my character can really just start ripping into all these mono bosses. It's not like as if it's that big of an issue. I really did kind of just nail it this time with the combo of the Ward Create Shadow plus the Bleed setup. It just feels so satisfying watching all those punctures, you know, pop off and like hit the boss there. Now, there is something to be said about running a ranged puncture setup with a bow. You could do that on a marksman. It would actually be kind of interesting. You would lose the ability to go for a one hand and a shield with like Falconer, but I could see a bow version of this build functioning for the most part. I'm not entirely sure how the gearing would go, because you can still use Sync Strike, by the way. I just want to let you know that. Yes, you can use Sync Strike while using a bow. So it's not like as if it wouldn't work. It would just be weird, dude. using Sync Strike like this with a bow. But I think the marksman version of this could be pretty good, all things considered, because range puncture lets you keep up puncture stacks while you range, of course, right? Then the range punctures, they pierce through enemies, which gives you a lot more clear. And it's not as if you'd be changing the character much. You'd lose a lot of your survivability, but in that, what you would lose, you would gain in just being able to be at range of the opponent for the most part. I think the only problem is you do have to sync strike in melee range in the way that like I'm doing it on screen here because of the way that the nets overlap. So I guess it isn't too much of a benefit for going with it, but it's definitely an option you can do. Like, I don't think it's like the worst idea in the world, right? Like, I don't really think you could go wrong with this at all. I do think the Falconer version, sadly, is the best one just because of how tanky you can get later. Because, like, once I get all the upgrades for this character, I'll probably have plenty of DPS for endgame. I just care about not dying, right? Not dying is very important later on, as you really don't like not dying. Or you just go the other way where you go ZHP, but that's kind of boring because like I don't like living in loading screens. Oh, speaking of that, oh yeah, this is the first kill I killed him where I was like, ha. I accidentally killed him after, doing this. So woohoo, still counts. So at this point, I've decided that I want to rush to get a Salt the Wound. So I'm going to start, trying to use my runes of ascendances that I've gotten at this point. And I don't end up hitting anything, sadly, because Salt the Wound right now would give us a very large amount of damage. That's because we don't get access to that much physical penetration as a rogue, but one thing we do get access to is a lot of crit multi, and that is the existence of Katana as a base, because it gives you like 60% crit multi on the base. You can get 60% crit multi on the prefix. You can get percent damage on the prefix. You can get crit multi on the amulet, on the blessing. You have crit multi on the gloves. All of that combined can lead to just a lot of extra damage given to us from Salt the Wounds. But I do go through all of these runes of ascendance and I don't get a single pair of Salt the Wounds, sadly. As you can see here, since we did not get a Salt the Wound from our ascendances, I decided to crack into my prophecies. I don't normally do this when I'm doing runs like this. The only reason I would do this is because if I was playing like trade, I would kind of just rush to the certain level of Merchant's Guild and then just hard buy my Salt the Wound. But of course, I don't really have access to that. I can't really do that in COF. So I decided to just try to spam for Salt the Wound as quickly as possible. So I ended up getting a decent amount of favor from it, spending a decent amount of favor for it here. So I was recording all of the prophecies that I landed, of course, and as you can see, I hover over it and I get a Ravenous Void. And that really pissed me off because if you don't know, Salt the Wound is not as rare as a Ravenous Void. Ravenous Void is like, I think 7 times rarer than a Salt the Wound. So just seeing that before a Salt the Wound just kind of felt like it was rubbing salt in the wound, if you get what I mean. Now, after discarding the Ravenous Void, because I wasn't going to cheat with it, I decided to go for even more prophecies, and we still didn't get one. And then I decided to use a Rune of Ascendance and I got one. Go figure. Now, of course, since we upgraded to Assault the Wound, that means that we can actually upgrade our weapons and go for dual katanas, which was the plan all along, as that much crit multi on top of all of our damage that we have can literally double our DPS. Just by equipping both of these katanas that I'm going to be equipping, we went from 400 or 300 bleed on the sheet to around 700 bleed on the sheet, which almost doubled our damage, which is wonderful. So of course, to christen the new gloves, I decided to go do another DPS check just to show you guys kind of the progress of this. And we went from 200k ticks all the way to 500k ticks. So literally just doubling our ticks right then and there. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you, Salt the Wounds. Now we have the second Orbis here. Now, it's kind of interesting. I take this Orbis, go from I think 150 corruption all the way to 290 or something like that. I jumped up really high in corruption in a very short amount of time. and you can tell later when I'm pushing through like 290C and shit like that. It's just really difficult. So now here's our 5th Harbinger with our DPS upgrade here. Um, as you can see, we're doing significantly more damage, and that's thanks to Salt the Wound, as that penetration is absolutely nuts. Even with us having to dodge half the attacks here from the Harbinger of Pride, we can kind of just make them our bitch just by just walking around and killing them and stuff like that. That ward, when you create a shadow, really is carrying me here, as it allows me to not focus too much on my gear, because I have like 1,000 extra ward on top of everything else, and that plus the Silver Shroud, just all of that combined leads to defenses being pretty good, all things considered. I do have a decent amount of glancing blow chance, and that's because I'm dual wielding swords on Blade Dancer, and then that plus all the glancing blow on the tree is enough to make me feel decent enough alongside the Dustron stacks I get from Smoke Bomb. Ooh, sorry about that, I got hiccups. But yeah, we delete him pretty quickly. Now, of course, here is another Oribus. We're trying to push our corruption as quickly as possible because I'm like, you know what? I feel strong enough. Let's try to just rush to 10 Harbingers and see how it feels. And it ends up feeling good, all things considered. We just kind of just want to get to endgame because I'll be honest, I'm pretty much finished with this character low key, dude. Like, I'm pretty happy with it for, a 0 to hero. And now I finally pay for my hubris. So I thought that I could kind of push to 300 corruption really quickly, and I can do the content. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I can do the content. The only problem is it's not necessarily comfortable, especially in the monoliths that I'll be doing, with divine mobs and stuff like that. So I felt a little squishy, all things considered, but that's because I literally went from 120 to 50 corruption all the way to 290 corruption in like one fell swoop, which caused, things to be significantly difficult, way more difficult than, what I was prepared to do with my current gear set. My gear is ass. I just want to let you know, like, there's so many things I could do to improve it at this point, and I'm kind of just getting ballsy, just trying to rush to get it done as fast as possible, because I'll be honest, guys, I have other things to do. Like, I don't just play Last Epoch. So generally I try to finish things when I can, because the whole point of this is to show you guys the process from level 1 all the way to 10 out of 10 Harbingers. And if this build can handle all 10 Harbingers at once, like this, right? Like just rushing all the way through them, might as well showcase it, right? So here I do have a little bit of a difficulty because, I'm a little squishy, but I have the damage for it for sure. Now here is where I get even more hubris. I decided to do the next Harbinger at 290 corruption while also having increased health and increased endurance on the boss. So this leads to the boss taking a decent amount of time, of course. As you can see, I actually upgraded my HP a little bit, about like 400-ish extra HP, which is like about 25% more health there. And that, on top of a few other upgrades that I did, makes it feel a bit better for this content. Now, as you can see, it actually takes a decent amount of time for me to kill these guys, not only because of all the modifiers on them, but of course they actually kind of spread out and all of my AoEs aren't overlapping. You really don't want this because it makes it really annoying to kill them all at once. As you can see though, we still do decently, but we are stuck being a melee build in this awkward state where we're kind of a melee build, but kind of not. So we have to kind of dodge everything in this regard, because that necrotic damage over time on top of those necrotic mortars do about probably twice my health right now in terms of damage. Same thing with those boulders. Like, we're not scaled at all for the content, but we're going to try to rush it anyways. So I think the bosses here ended up being harder than the Harbinger himself. The Harbinger himself actually wasn't that hard, and that's just because I've kind of learned how to deal with this one. A lot of people have problems with them, but I found that, so in this first stage, he doesn't do that much damage necrotic dot wise. And once he starts actually attacking and doing things, you want to move out of the way to one side of the arena. There's two reasons for that. First things off, the necrotic dot pool is going to start throwing necrotic mortars at you, which are the things that will actually kill you. Then you'll also have the big fireball being punched in your face. all of that combined can lead to you taking a lot of damage. Right? You can see here, I'm kind of manipulating his position, and now, of course, I fucked up there, but in general, you can kind of actually dodge the balls way quicker and easier if you just simply maneuver it properly. You can also utilize effects like decoy to maneuver the dot pool. You can actually move it somewhere else. As you can see here, I'm going to move him over here because I don't want to deal with him when the big ball's moving around. And if you have a decent amount of movement speed, you can actually maneuver around the balls pretty easily, all things considered. But generally, you can get a little bit of DPS in that phase, and then you want to move him because he will teleport to where you are once, you know, enough time has passed. But he'll do the first big balls first, and then he'll teleport to you. And then after that, you can do some DPS and kind of relax for a little bit. I found that this boss is a lot easier once you employ this tactic. Even if you're playing a melee build, it makes it feel way better. You just want him to be where you're at. And it also does not give him much time to do those void pools. Those void pools are actually just very obnoxious, all things considered. The void pools suck in general. Like, they suck dick. You generally want him to not be doing that, and you can make him not do that if you make him go through all of his other animations and you make him spam the dance too, like the dance like that, and like when he like moves and stuff like that. If you make him do other things, he won't have the time to do the void pools. But here's something really funny happens. It's kind of funny that it's happened twice here. Here we go. Oh, donk. I actually was at the smidgen out of the AoE, but you know what? It counts. It fucking counts, so who cares? So here I'm employing a little bit of a trick. I'm actually going to the Temporal Sanctum to put my gloves into a Nemesis, because you get Nemesis on the first floor pretty conveniently here. Now we go to another Temporal Sanctum. We got 1 LP. We're going to try to empower that and try to get 2 LP, but like, let's be real, that's not going to happen. That's 1 LP. Now we only got 1 LP on the gloves, but that does mean we can actually get an upgrade here, because, you know, even with all that extra ward, when we're pushing to like 300 corruption, that's when enemies are going to start actually doing decent amounts of damage to us, and only being around at like 1.7k to 2k HP is not very good for your mental health, because you'll always be on the edge of death. So you definitely want to get out of this situation as quickly as possible. So here I'm crafting a few pairs of gloves to see what I can throw onto my Salt the Wound here. Hopefully it does not hit that crit chance. I'm really hoping it does not hit that crit chance. It would be awful if it hit that crit chance, but it would just be my luck if it hit that crit chance, right? But yeah, we're going to upgrade these gloves here. Hopefully we hit whatever we want here. And we did hit hybrid health, which is a decent amount of HP. We go all the way to 2300, which is acceptable for now. And now that we finally got done with our upgrades, and I feel like I'm strong enough to take on the content, we're just going to use all of our Glyphs of Envy to rush down the rest of the Harbingers, because I've gotten enough corruption where I can, you know, bounce to 300 corruption whenever I need to, meaning that I can just go through every mono, kill bosses, and get Glyphs of Envy, and then use those envies to kill more bosses. So we're just going to go through and kill all the Harbingers real quick. Very simple, all things considered. This one, like, is a little annoying considering I'm at 30% void res, but like with the proper amount of dodging and the proper amount of setup, it's not too big of a deal. I probably shouldn't be doing this with 30% void res, but at this point I've just decided that I just wanted to finish the character, dude. I'm pretty happy with it, and it's like, it's time to move on to the next one. Not because I wasn't enjoying it or if I don't want to keep playing it, but because I have content to make. So this Harbinger goes down pretty fast, all things considered. It's one of the easier ones. This is actually why we keep the easier ones for later, because, you know, when they're big hunks of meat like this and they're not that difficult in comparison to the small Harbingers, it makes pushing them into corruption not as hard. If you leave the small Harbingers for the higher corruptions, you'll, especially if you're playing a mediocre build, right, you'll have a terrible time. This build can handle the bigger Harbingers, but not the like the Gathering Storm build like I played like the other day, right? Now, all these boss fights with these Harbingers are lasting about a minute, which is around where you want to be at this point in progression, especially if you're in like Merchant's Guild or high COF. You don't want bosses to be taking that long because, you know, you don't want it to become a snooze fest. But at the same time, if your boss fight at like 700 corruption for Harbinger takes around like maybe 2 minutes, that's not that big of a deal, especially if you have good clear speed. If you have good clear speed, it's fine. But if your damage is mediocre on single target and your clear is mediocre, then I would kind of think about it a little bit more. But I'm pretty happy, all things considered, if I'm like doing bosses pretty quickly and my clear is good enough, right? And the clear on this is just divine. So, and the bossing on this is pretty quick, all things considered. Now, of course, like I said, if you want a more endgame compatible version that can push way farther, I would suggest looking into making a Falconer version. I won't be making a planner for that, but like, you know, once Falconer finally decides to leave alpha testing, I might make a Falconer version of this with the shield and stuff like that if I play Merchant's Guild and try to push it to a high level of content. Just to save you time and me time, we're going to abridge this. Harbinger Stinky, Harbinger die. Now here's the end of the challenge here. We have the last Harbinger. I decided to not go against Aberoth for a few reasons. The main one being my gear isn't that good per se. Like my survivability isn't high enough. The damage is probably there, but I can't just face tank Aberoth, and that would require me to go and farm all my blessings and stuff like that. And I really don't want to do that, mainly because I have other characters to play. The whole purpose of this series is to kind of just give you guys an idea of like what you should be doing at this point, how your character should be feeling, like give you kind of goals to work towards. And it's also meant to give me an idea of what I want to play in the future, because now that I know that this build works really well, now I can go and experiment with some other builds and some other ideas, right? But I can always keep this in my back pocket if I need a cycle starter and a hitch, right? I can definitely take this build, invest it, kill Aberoth, kill 700 Corruption Harbingers, and have good clear, all things considered. But yeah, that's the end of the challenge there. Right here. There you go. Bye. So now, of course, the guide part of the video. Let's talk about the skills, shall we? So for net here, mainly what we care about is getting access to net trap, which turns net into a trap, which I believe enables it from being able to be thrown with your shadows. Now, you can only have 6 net traps at once, but if you do make more, it will trigger your old net traps here, as you can see with the punctures going off. And that's important to us because we're going to be throwing out a lot of nets, as you can see here, which causes a lot of things to happen. Now, here we grab 2 additional traps thrown. So instead of only throwing 1 trap, we throw 3, which means we get 3 punctures per click. And of course, you know, we get a bunch of caltrops and stuff like that. Now, if I'm not mistaken, if it works how I think it does, if when I do this, I'm getting about if I'm to do the math, it is about 15 punctures technically on a single target if it all goes right. Now, that's if it works how I think it does. It's really hard to tell with all of this shenaniganry going on, but I'm pretty sure we're getting a very large amount of punctures on top of our nets because of Spare Trap. Now, some other things that I focused on is actually grabbing curved hooks for extra bleed duration and more damage, because the net itself actually hits and applies a bleed. So that helps a lot, right? And of course here, more damage per dodge chance. That doesn't really work right now, but when we have, you know, actual, you know, dust shrouds and we're actually investing into our gear, not just running absolute fucking trash, that node will be a lot more viable later on, of course. Then we just go up here and just grab Leading the Hunt for just 10% more damage. Pretty good. And caltrops. Now it says when using net, drop caltrops at your starting location after jumping. I'm pretty sure each shadow drops 1 caltrop. It's hard to tell, but if you use 1 caltrop here, and then like if I go over here and you Sync Strike then caltrop, there's significantly more caltrops over here than there are over here. So that means that we're probably getting more caltrops. It's just not, I just don't have any idea of how many. But that's pretty much it for net. Now the other skill here, Synchronized Strike, we just care about grabbing shadows, getting extra shadows of course, because we want as many shadows as possible with this. Getting the mana efficiency here from dynamics so that we don't have to spend too much on it. Getting some health gain from Synchronized Strike. This just gives us a very large amount of health gain early on, and it just helps us out with sustaining our HP pool on top of everything else we do. Then get some attack speed here from Art of the Blade, just generic attack speed, lets everything be more smooth, because we don't need that much attack speed with this build, but we definitely want a decent amount so that, you know, our plays aren't that sluggish, especially against endgame bosses. Then we grab the Crimson Storm here just to get a bunch of stacks of Crimson Shroud, which makes it so we take less damage over time, which is really good, especially for playing a dual wield build like we are currently. That's pretty much it for that. For Puncture, it's just your stereotypical Puncture tree, nothing too different. Mainly just getting all the bleed stacks for single target, for poking them for single target. Then, of course, getting mana as well to help us sustain our sync strikes. Then we also go for the attack speed here. Our Puncture is actually not really designated that much for damage from the trigger per se. We do a decent amount of damage from it, especially thanks to Smoke Bomb getting 200% bleed chance here. But it's mainly focused on getting us utility for trying to fill up our mana. Because filling up our mana is way more important than like having a little bit of extra damage from Puncture's tree, right? That's pretty much it for Puncture. Smoke Bomb here, it's utility. Mainly we're using it for the movement skill, which then gives us a Silver Shroud stack on use. It also gives us access to a bunch of Puncture bleed chance when we're inside the smoke, which will apply to all of our extra punctures we're getting from Net Trap. We're also creating shadows that actually gives us ward per second, as you can see, thanks to all of our ward per second, which is just nice sustain overall, and it gives us extra shadows to throw even more Net Traps for us. Then we also grab the Dust Shroud stuff here, just a lot of extra dodge and glancing blow chance. Eventually you'd want to have more duration on this, but like we're kind of like stretched for points. Probably cut the Dust Shroud stuff for the duration, I'm not entirely sure. Or maybe Hidden Blows. Early on this was really good, but for later on, when you have like a bunch of bleed chance, like let's say like 800% bleed chance, maybe you don't need this and go in the duration instead. That's pretty much it for Smoke Bomb. Then for Umbral Blades, like if you've ever seen an Umbral Blade tree, this is just like your stereotypical Umbral Blade tree. Pretty much, we're just going for spinny blades so that they spin and deal extra bleeds. Then for extra clear, then we also grab all the explosion stuff so they also explode as well. So when we go over the cap, we get a bunch of free explosions, and then we get even more explosions when these ones pop. And then, just Shadows drop Umbral Blades, which allows us to actually cast the Umbral Blades when we're doing our Net Trap stuff. That's pretty much it for skills. Let's talk about passives that are important. So for this build specifically, the more important nodes, I forgot to actually readjust these nodes, but it's like whatever. The more important nodes mainly are just getting this node here for just health gained on Shadow Creation, on top of all the other health gain, getting as much HP as possible, getting as much bleed chance as possible from the tree, trying to squeeze out as much as possible. Then here, getting the 40% glancing blow chance on top of all the other glancing blow, right? Makes it so that we don't instantly die when things hit us. The less damage taken here, the extra shadow here. It's actually the main benefit of being a Blade Dancer is we get 5 shadows instead of 4, which means instead of actually, it's even less than that. I think it's 3 shadows for a Falconer. So it means that Synchronized Strike works way better as a Blade Dancer than it works as a Falconer, but there are other ways to make that up. But pretty much, yeah, that's the main reason why we're a Blade Dancer, because we can get 5 shadows, which feels way better to play around with Sync Strike and Smoke Bomb here. That's the main reason why we're a Blade Dancer. Then in Falconer's tree, we just grab a lot of HP, even Endurance Threshold is maximum health and all that. Then some extra mana regen, because we want as much mana regen as possible on this build to make it as smooth as possible. That's pretty much it for the passives. Let's talk about blessings. So my blessings are kind of fucked, but that doesn't matter. Crit multi or void res here, probably void res, because void res is way harder to get on your gear as a rogue than crit multi, because we need all these juicy affixes for HP and good uniques. So definitely getting void res here would be better. Here, ward per second is fine, ward when hit is fine, and lightning res, of course, is also fine if you don't have enough lightning res, but the ward per second feels pretty good, especially with my current ward retention threshold and stuff like that. Then here, just Chance to bleed, of course, can't really go wrong with this. Then you can run blind chance on one of your weapons so you don't have to deal with crits and just having a bunch of extra bleed chance. Then armor percent here, maybe a better rolled one. Then armor flat here, and you're good to go on blessings. Now for gearing here, there's not that many required uniques. You don't require any uniques, but these are nice to have for sure. First thing you should be going for is the Founder's Chalice. This provides you with impeccable sustain while also giving you a decent amount of damage. I put mine in the Kringulator and got endurance, which is pretty good. But yeah, mainly you're looking for it for the 20 health gained on kill per second bleed on the target, which pretty much heals you to full every single time you kill anything, which helps especially with those nasty event mob packs. Then for here, Salt the Wound. To give you an idea of why Salt the Wound is needed, look at that. Almost doubles, literally more than doubles our damage. That's why you run Salt the Wound. Pretty easy, right? Then double Katana here. Here, instead of that melee cold, you want mana and mana regen, because you want as much mana regen as possible to make this build feel smooth in monos and on single target. But otherwise, it's a pretty good one. You can burn bleed on blind on hit or fizz pen instead of that poison though. Here, percent fizz, you'd rather have crit multi and mana regen, but I was going to take whatever I can get. Here, bleed chance as well on the suffix. Helmet up. Now, for another thing that's really integral for this build, I would suggest having early is ward gained when you create a shadow on your helmet, in your chest here. It's like 120. Then here you can also get ward gain when you create a shadow as well on idols. All that combined leads to us actually having a decent amount of ward when we're clearing monos, which feels pretty good, all things considered. We like ward because it just gives us extra EHP. Who cares if we don't have any retention? That doesn't fucking matter. We just want more EHP. So ward when you create a shadow. Those are the mandatory things I think for this build that you want to have eventually. But let's go over the rest of the gear. Like I said, could be way better. Could have bleed chance and stuff like that on the helmet and a better helmet base. Amulet here. This actually perfect stats for an amulet. Sorry about that. It would just need to be on a better base, like an Oracle amulet or a Res amulet. Chest here, mainly here, bleed chance per equipped sword. Ward when you create a shadow, then HP on a better base. Rings here, damage over time, mana regen, HP resistance. Same thing on the other side, HP resistance, mana regen, damage, because you want as much mana regen as possible to make the Sync Strike feel good. Then belt here, mana regen, fizz damage eventually, HP. Boots here, you can run a Blood of the Exile, but I would suggest running something with HP on it first, like a Citadel boots with HP, double HP. Then moving into a Blood of the Exile when you have like a 1 to 2 LP one of it, then you can run Blood of the Exile, in my opinion. You don't really need the damage early on, so there's no point in investing into it. You'd rather just have HP from like in a Terrace Path, then move into a real pair of boots later on. Then, of course, Relic on Founder's Chalice. Pretty good, all things considered. Then for our idols, main thing we care about, mana efficiency with Sync Strike. Same thing with here, mana efficiency when we use Sync Strike. It's actually our best in slot idol, ward gain to create a shadow, and mana efficiency with Sync Strike. Very good idol. Both those just really good, making our Sync Strike not cost a billion mana. Then for the rest of our idols, you can just put in whatever you feel like to cap your reses and to give yourself extra HP. That's pretty much it for the character. That's pretty much it for the build today. With all that being said, this has been Dread. I'll have to go do something else. Bye.